Why was everyone so quiet? That was the first thing she noticed, the silence. Not the kind that comes before an explosion, but the kind that fills a room when pride and disbelief collide. The hall smelled of jet fuel, sweat, and something harder to name, fear disguised as arrogance. 100 men in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces carved by years of battle, their bodies built for war. The overhead lights hummed with the same nervous energy that rippled through the crowd. At the front stood the SEAL captain, square jaw, gray temples, eyes like iron filings. His voice cut through the air like a command that didn't need repeating. Any combat pilots here? For a heartbeat, nothing, not a shuffle, not a sound. Men who had stared down death looked suddenly unsure. Then quietly, without noise or need for approval, a single chair scraped back. Every head turned. She rose. She wasn't tall, not imposing, not the image that came to mind when someone said combat pilot. But she stood like she'd been through the storm and learned how to breathe in it. Captain Eleanor Hayes. The name meant nothing to most of them. But the way she looked back at the SEAL captain, steady, unflinching, made him pause. Someone coughed. Another smirked. It spread like a small wave of disbelief. A woman. Here. In this briefing. The captain's eyes narrowed, reading her the way soldiers read terrain, looking for weakness, for cracks. But she didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't shrink. She just stood there, as if the weight of 100 eyes meant nothing. She'd been through worse than stares. Long before this room, before the questions, before the whispers, she'd been told she wasn't built for this world. Too calm, too quiet, too careful. But in the silence of her calm, she'd learned something the loud ones never understood. Control is the edge between life and death. Back then, when she was still a cadet, the instructors didn't know what to do with her. They threw doubt at her like bullets, expecting one to hit. You're not strong enough. You're not fast enough. This isn't a place for you. She didn't argue, she remembered. Every insult etched itself into her bones. And every dawn after that, she trained until she couldn't stand. She ran through sand until her lungs bled, then flew simulators until her eyes burned. When others broke, she studied why. When they celebrated small victories, she prepared for the next loss. Because she'd already seen how fast victory turns to ashes. Years ago, another mission, another sky, Eleanor had flown a medevac Blackhawk through a canyon so narrow the rotors shaved rock. Below her, chaos, smoke, screams. Her co-pilot had taken a round through the neck before the first extraction. She felt his body go limp beside her, blood spraying the windshield like rain. But the engine still roared. The men below still waited, so she flew. She landed hard, rotors inches from rock face, and dragged 2 wounded soldiers aboard by herself. When they lifted, an RPG streaked from the ridge. She banked right, felt the heat tear past the fuselage, heard shrapnel chew through metal. But she kept flying. Because someone always needed her to keep flying. That night when command debriefed her, she didn't speak of the co-pilot, or the burns on her arms, or how her hands shook for hours afterward. She just said, mission complete. They called her resilient. They didn't know she hadn't slept since. Now, in the cold light of this SEAL briefing room, the ghosts of those missions pressed against her ribs like armor. The captain broke the silence first. Step forward. Her boots clicked softly against the tile as she approached. Men whispered. One of them muttered something under his breath, something she didn't catch, but she knew the tone. She'd heard it before. That tone soldiers used when they needed to feel taller. She stopped at attention. The captain studied her again, then asked, "You seen combat?" Her reply was a whisper that filled the room. Yes. Just one word. But it carried every storm she'd survived. Something shifted in the air. Not acceptance yet, but curiosity, the kind that borders on respect. The captain nodded once slow. You'll brief with Blue Squadron, classified extraction. High risk, low margin, wheels up at 400. And that was it. No more questions, no more disbelief, just orders. Because once you step into a mission room, rank, gender, pride, none of it matters. The only thing that matters is who comes back alive. She moved toward the back again, where she'd started. Her heart beat steady, her mind already mapping out everything that could go wrong. But there was something she hadn't told them, something none of them needed to know yet. This mission wasn't her first in that region. And the last time she flew those coordinates, she didn't bring everyone home. She still remembered their names. Still heard the calls crackling in her headset, the static, the panic, the screams. It wasn't failure that haunted her. It was the sound of silence afterward. The silence of the radio when no one answered back. "Ma'am." A voice jolted her out of memory. A younger operator, maybe 22, nervous but curious. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what's it like up there, when the fire starts?" She looked at him for a long moment. What could she say? That fear never really leaves, it just gets quieter. That sometimes courage isn't roaring, it's whispering to yourself to keep moving. Instead, she just said softly, "It's loud, but the hardest part is what you hear when it's over." The kid blinked, unsure what to do with that. She didn't blame him. There are things you can't understand until you've sat in the dark with the smell of burning metal in your lungs. The next hours blurred into preparation. Checklists, flight plans, silence between commands. In the corner, Eleanor adjusted her gear with mechanical precision. She always double-checked the straps, the comms, the sidearm, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew the margin for error was human. Every sound, every click, every hum of the hangar echoed against the hollow places inside her where memories used to live. She didn't fill them anymore, she just carried them. At 3:45, the SEAL captain walked past her Blackhawk. He paused, watching her run her hand along the fuselage like she was tracing an old scar. "First light's rough," he said. "Visibility low, wind cross shears near the pass." She nodded, "Copy that." He hesitated, then asked quietly, "You sure you're good for this one?" She met his eyes. There was no defiance, no pride, just truth. "I don't know how to be anything else." He gave a small nod. For the first time he almost smiled. "Fair enough, Captain Hayes, let's bring them home." She climbed into the cockpit as dawn began to bleed across the horizon. The engines whined, turbines building like thunder under her feet. She adjusted her gloves, settled the helmet, and breathed out once steady. Outside, the SEALs loaded up in silence, their faces painted, eyes distant. No one laughed now, no one doubted. The mission erased everything but focus. Over the radio, the captain's voice crackled. "Blackhawk 1, you are clear for takeoff." She eased the throttle forward. The rotors blurred into the sky, kicking up dust and sunlight. The aircraft rose smooth, controlled, like she'd done it 1,000 times, because she had. But as the base shrank below, her chest tightened. It wasn't fear. It was memory. Of another dawn, another takeoff, another promise to bring them home, and the radio silence that followed. She shook it off, focused. Altitude steady, heading north by east. Her co-pilot, a young lieutenant, sat beside her, eyes on the instrument panel. He'd read her file, he knew her record, but he didn't know her. After a while he asked, "Why'd you come back, ma'am, after everything?" She didn't look at him. The horizon ahead burned gold over the desert ridges. "Because someone has to," she said. He nodded slowly, as if that answer both scared and inspired him. Maybe both. As the sun climbed, their radio crackled again. The captain's voice, low and deliberate. Target zone in 60. We'll rendezvous on signal, eyes up. She acknowledged. Copy. Blackhawk 1 moving to approach vector. Then silence again. Just the hum of rotors, the rhythmic pulse of machinery, and the quiet heartbeat of a woman who had once promised herself she'd never return here, and did anyway. Because courage isn't about never breaking. It's about choosing to rise, even when the world's still laughing. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the calm, beneath the discipline, Eleanor Hayes whispered a single thought that would carry her through what was coming. Not again, not this time. Why did the clouds look familiar? That thought hit her as the Blackhawk sliced through the cold dawn air. The ridgelines below rose like sleeping beasts, shadows carving teeth into the horizon. To anyone else it was just terrain. To Eleanor Hayes it was memory. She'd flown this sky before. Different mission, different year, same silence in her chest. The radio hummed faintly with coded chatter, numbers, coordinates, clipped updates. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Branson, handled most of it, his hands steady but his voice betraying youth. He was good, though, sharp, focused, the kind of flyer who still believed skill could control chaos. Eleanor knew better. She scanned the instruments, then the horizon, then back again. Routine, rhythmic, the kind of focus that kept fear from becoming noise. Beneath them, the desert unfolded, an ocean of gold dust and jagged stone. The sun had climbed just enough to turn every shadow into a knife. Approach vector green, Branson reported. She nodded. Maintain altitude at 500. We stay low until signal flare. They were headed toward a small valley marked only by a thin line on the map, a remote village near the border zone. Intelligence said a recon team had gone dark there 48 hours ago. Hostile presence likely. Extraction priority, critical. The kind of mission no one wanted, and the kind she always volunteered for. Her headset crackled. Blackhawk 1, this is command. Be advised weather system shifting east. Expect turbulence on exfil. She acknowledged, copy command. Branson glanced over. Looks calm from here. Eleanor didn't answer. Calm skis had lied to her before. A few minutes of silence passed. Then he spoke again, softer this time. Captain, you've done a lot of these, haven't you? She hesitated. Enough. What's it like when everything goes wrong? Her lips tightened. The kind of question rookies asked before they'd seen what wrong really meant. She thought of the canyon, the blood on the windshield, the names etched in her memory like coordinates she couldn't forget. She didn't look at him. You don't think, she said finally. You just keep flying. Branson nodded slowly. He didn't press again. The wind shifted. The Blackhawk shuddered slightly, cross-current. Eleanor adjusted instinctively, hands light on the stick, mind already ahead of the aircraft. Her movements were calm, almost surgical, the kind of control born from someone who's danced on the edge too many times and learned not to flinch. Through the headset, the SEAL captain's voice came in. Visual in 90 seconds. Keep eyes sharp. We don't know what's waiting down there. Copy, she replied. The village came into view like a scar against the earth. Clusters of worn stone houses, smoke rising in thin gray strands, the faint glint of metal near the ridgeline. Too quiet. Something off, Branson murmured. Eleanor felt it too. The air carried that same heavy stillness she remembered from the day her last crew vanished. She exhaled slowly. Stay alert. As they circled once, she caught a flicker of movement near one of the rooftops, then another. Branson tensed. Hostiles. Could also be shadows, she said. Mark grid Delta 7, we'll do one more pass. The second pass told her everything she needed to know. 2 vehicles camouflaged under netting, heat signatures, and one flare, green, faint, almost desperate, bursting near the center of the compound. Signal confirmed, she said. Teams alive. Branson's relief was audible. That's our boys. Eleanor didn't smile. Relief was a luxury. She knew better than to celebrate early. She tapped the intercom. Command, this is Blackhawk 1. We have visual on Team Flare. Request clearance for extraction sequence. Static then, clearance granted, proceed. She lowered altitude, the Blackhawk descending like a dark hawk cutting through silence. Dust whipped up in wild spirals as the rotors neared ground level. The village roofs rattled. Through the swirling haze, she saw them. 5 figures in tactical gear sprinting toward the LZ, weapons raised, movements sharp but strained. Coming in hot, Branson called. Hold steady, she said. We've got them. For a second, the plan held. Then came the first flash. A bright streak from the ridge, then another. Rocket trail incoming. RPG, Branson yelled. Eleanor didn't think. She reacted. Left bank, collective down. The Blackhawk swung hard, dirt exploding across the windshield. The rocket missed by meters, detonating behind them in a storm of fire and rock. The shockwave punched the aircraft sideways. Warning screamed across her console. Branson grabbed the controls. Stabilizers red. I've got it, she barked, correcting the tilt. The rotors groaned, but the bird leveled. Below, the SEALs dove for cover, their formation scattering. Over comms, we're pinned, multiple shooters north ridge. Eleanor's pulse hammered. She took them higher out of direct line, then banked toward the mountain slope. Branson marked those coordinates, weapons hot. He hesitated. Ma'am, our orders. Changed the moment they fired first. She swung the Blackhawk into a sharp curve, nose down. The gunner, already braced, unleashed a controlled burst, tracer rounds cutting through smoke, silencing 2 enemy positions. For a few seconds it worked, then another missile warning lit up. She cursed under her breath. They've got more. The second rocket screamed toward them from the east ridge. Branson shouted, countermeasures armed. Do it now. Flares deployed, bright white trails cutting across the dawn. The missile veered off, detonating harmlessly midair, but the concussion wave hit them hard enough to rattle every bolt. The SEAL team's commander came over comms, breath ragged. We're secure, repeat, we have all 5, request immediate lift. Copy that, Eleanor said, moving in. She dropped altitude again, the rotors kicking up another blinding storm of sand and smoke. The team sprinted through it, loading in fast. One man stumbled, wounded. She saw blood blooming through his sleeve. Without thinking, Eleanor unbuckled and reached out through the side door, helping haul him in. Her gloves smeared red. The last man climbed aboard, slamming the hatch. Go, go, go. Hold tight, she said, voice steady despite the chaos. We're not clear yet. She pulled the stick back, the helicopter surging skyward. The village shrank below, tracer fire chasing them upward like angry ghosts. Then a sound she hadn't heard in years. A tone so sharp it sliced through everything else. Missile lock. Her heart stopped. Branson, talk to me. Missile lock confirmed. South Ridge, I can't. Deploy chaff now. Too late. The explosion hit near the tail boom, direct contact. The Blackhawk jolted violently, alarm screaming, controls shaking in her grip. Tail rotors gone, Branson shouted. We're spinning. Eleanor fought it, muscles burning, every nerve focused. She could hear the men shouting behind her, chaos, panic. The horizon flipped, blurred. She countered with everything she had. Brace for impact. The world tilted. Then darkness. It was the smell that reached her first. Fuel, dirt, blood. Then voices, distant, muffled, the ringing in her ears fatting just enough to make sense of the chaos. She opened her eyes, blurred light, cracked windshield, smoke filling the cabin. Her body screamed with pain, but she moved anyway. Branson, she gasped. He didn't answer. His side of the cockpit was twisted metal and fire. "Branson," she shouted again. A weak sound came back, coughing, then silence. She unbuckled, forcing herself free. Pain flared up her side, but she ignored it. Crawling over debris, she pulled him out of the harness. His face was bloodied, pale, but breathing. Barely. The SEALs were already moving in the back, dragging gear, checking weapons. One of them, Sergeant older, met her eyes. "We've got wounded. Bird's done. What's the call, Captain?" She swallowed, mind spinning between training and instinct. Smoke rising, radio dead, enemy close. They were alive, but only for now. "Perimeter defense," she said hoarsely. "We hold here until comms back online." The sergeant nodded, signaling his men. They fanned out, weapons ready. Eleanor crouched by Branson, pressing a hand against his shoulder wound. He flinched, groaned, but opened his eyes. "You good?" she whispered. He tried to smile. "Next time maybe I fly." "Noted," she said softly. But her eyes were already scanning the horizon. Something in her chest, a deep old ache, tightened. This was the same silence, the same light, the same kind of broken sky that haunted her dreams. Years ago, another downed bird, another team pinned. She had promised herself it would never happen again. And now here she was. The sergeant returned. "Captain, movement in the East Ridge, could be locals, could be worse." Eleanor looked at him, then at the wounded around her. There were 7 of them now, 3 injured, 1 unconscious. Limited ammo, no extraction. And the sound of engines, distant, approaching. She closed her eyes briefly. She knew what came next. They'd have to fight their way out. But beneath the sharp edges of fear, something else flickered to life. A quiet, relentless resolve. She had been here before. She had survived before. And she would again. She rose, dust coating her gloves, voice low but unwavering. "All right," she said, "we dig in, we hold, and when the sky clears." She glanced upward, the smoke curling above them. "We fly." The men nodded. The sergeant smiled grimly. And for a brief second, surrounded by wreckage and uncertainty, Eleanor Hayes felt something strange. Peace. Because when everything burns away, fear, pride, rank, what's left is purpose. And hers was simple. Keep them alive. No matter what. Why did the night feel familiar? Not the stars, those were different here. Not the cold wind sweeping across the broken valley. It was the silence. The kind that came after the fire, when engines stopped screaming and all you could hear was your own pulse. Captain Eleanor Hayes sat beside the shattered tail of her Blackhawk, headset gone, comms dead, shoulder bleeding through the torn sleeve of her flight suit. Around her, 7 men worked in near silence, their movements automatic, soldiers clinging to training to keep the fear from taking shape. The wreckage burned faintly, casting long, trembling shadows across the sand. Every shadow looked like a memory. She reached for her water canteen, hand trembling slightly. The tremor wasn't from pain, it was from recognition. She had been here before. Not this exact valley, but one like it. Same wreck, same night, same sound of men breathing hard and pretending they weren't scared. Only difference then, she hadn't been able to save them. A soft voice broke through, "Captain Hayes." It was the Sergeant Ruiz. Gray at the temples, calm eyes, the kind of man who had seen enough to understand the cost of survival. He crouched beside her, offering a bandage roll. "You're bleeding through that patch." She took it with a nod, "Thanks." He hesitated before asking, "How bad are we hit?" She exhaled, glancing around. The Blackhawk was gutted, tail rotor gone, port engine burned out, fuselage cracked. "We're not flying this bird," she said quietly. "Not tonight." He followed her gaze toward the ridges. "And those engines we heard." 2, maybe 3 trucks, light vehicles. She paused, listening to the faint hum echoing through the valley. They're circling, trying to box us in. Ruiz nodded grimly. They'll come at first light. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the rhythm of ambushes, hit hard while the dark still favors confusion, or wait for sunrise when the world is clear enough to aim. She turned toward the remaining SEALs. They were younger than she expected. One of them, Collins, barely looked 20. He was setting up perimeter sensors, trying not to look at the smoke still curling from the wreckage. Another, Vega, sat with Branson, checking his pulse, murmuring quiet reassurance even though his eyes said he didn't believe it himself. Eleanor pulled her rifle close, chambered around, and glanced at Ruiz. We'll need to move before sunrise. He frowned. Evac not coming, ma'am, not without signal. I know, she paused. That's why we move toward higher ground, Ridge Alpha. I can set the beacon once we're above interference. He studied her for a moment. That's a hell of a climb with wounded. She met his eyes. I've done worse. He didn't argue. He just nodded, quiet respect replacing doubt. Hours crawled. The desert changed color as the night deepened, shadows thickening into walls, wind carving whispers through the sand. They had made a small defensive ring around the wreck, stacking debris into cover points, sensors planted in a half-moon arc facing the ridges. Every sound mattered, every silence mattered more. Eleanor moved through the perimeter, checking positions. Her steps were deliberate, soft, controlled. Vega looked up as she passed. You think they'll come tonight? She looked out into the dark. They already have. They're just waiting for us to blink first. He swallowed. How can you tell? Because I would. She kept walking, eyes scanning the horizon. When she reached Branson again, he was half-conscious, breathing shallow. She knelt beside him, checking his pulse. His eyelids fluttered. Captain. I'm here, she said softly. He tried to smile. You pulled me out. You'd have done the same. Maybe, he whispered. You just make it look easy. She almost laughed, the kind that never really leaves your throat. Nothing about this is easy, Lieutenant. He closed his eyes again, murmuring something she couldn't quite hear, a name maybe, then drifted back into uneasy sleep. Eleanor stayed there a while, her back against the shattered hull, rifle resting across her lap. The night stretched endless. And in that stillness, her mind wandered where she never wanted it to go. It had been 3 years. Different desert, same silence. They'd called it Operation Halberd, a covert retrieval mission deep beyond enemy lines. She was still young then, still believed that courage alone could rewrite the odds. They'd been hit midair by a lucky shot. Her co-pilot gone before the bird even touched ground. 5 survivors. She had kept them alive for 17 hours under constant fire. 17 hours until rescue never came. When she finally made it out, burned, dehydrated, half delirious, she was the only one breathing. The after-action report called her heroic under duress. She called it what it was, failure. For months she had replayed the last radio call in her head, the static, the silence, the unanswered copy that. Even now, the memory still found her like a ghost with good timing. She pressed her palms together, breathing through the ache in her ribs. That past wasn't gone, it was waiting. And this mission, this crash, felt like the universe's cruel attempt to see what she'd learned since. The motion sensor blinked. Once, then again. Eleanor froze. Ruiz saw it too. North perimeter, he whispered. They moved in silence, rifles raised. Through the scope she caught faint movement, 3, maybe 4 shapes slipping between rocks. 2 disciplined for scavengers. She adjusted her aim, finger steady on the trigger. Hold, she whispered to Ruiz. Let them come closer. Seconds stretched. Heartbeats counted time better than watches. Then a voice. Faint male, American accent. This is Sergeant Dyer, 3rd Recon. We've got survivors. Ruiz exhaled hard, lowering his weapon. "Friendly," he muttered. Eleanor didn't lower hers yet. "Prove it," she said quietly. The figure stepped forward, raising his hands. "Call sign Ridgeback. We were the recon element you were sent for." She finally eased her rifle down, motioning to Ruiz. "Bring them in." 4 men approached, dirt-streaked, exhausted, their faces drawn. Dyer saluted weakly. "Ma'am, we heard the crash. We've been hiding out since contact. You picked a hell of a spot to drop in." She gave a tired half-smile. "Not my best landing." He chuckled, then his eyes fell on the wounded. "We've got med supplies, not much but enough to keep them stable." They moved quickly, patching wounds, redistributing ammo. For the first time that night, it felt like maybe they'd make it until dawn. Then a soft pop echoed in the distance. Flares, red ones. Ruiz's head snapped up. "They've got our position." Eleanor didn't hesitate. "Positions now." The first shots came seconds later, echoes cracking across stone and sand. Tracer rounds slicing through the dark like falling stars. She pressed herself behind a burnt section of fuselage, returning fire in short bursts. The night erupted into chaos, shouting, muzzle flashes, sand spraying. "Branson's down," Vega yelled from behind her. "Hold your line," she shouted back, voice steady even as bullets tore through the wreck beside her. Ruiz fired from the left flank. 2 hostiles down, more incoming. Her ears rang, heart pounding with the rhythm of survival. She caught sight of one enemy crawling closer through the dark, precise, deliberate. She took a breath, adjusted, and squeezed the trigger. One shot clean. Silence briefly returned, broken only by the sound of breathing and the crackle of distant fire. When it ended, there were no cheers, no relief, just exhaustion. Eleanor crawled toward the wounded, checking pulses. Ruiz joined her, dragging a pack. He looked around the carnage. "We can't stay here, ma'am. They'll regroup." "I know," she said quietly. He hesitated, watching her as she wiped soot from her face. "You've done this before." She looked up, eyes distant. "Too many times." Ruiz nodded slowly. "You ever get used to it?" She shook her head. "You never should." The fire from the wreck burned lower now, embers flickering like dying stars. Somewhere behind them, Branson stirred again, whispering in fevered half-sleep. She reached out, touching his hand lightly, grounding herself. In the darkness, something shifted inside her, a resolve she'd buried under years of obedience and silence. For so long, she'd flown missions others planned, followed orders others wrote. But not tonight. Not after what she'd seen, what she'd lost. If command had left them to die here, she would make damn sure they lived anyway. She looked at Ruiz. "We move at first light. We climb the ridge, set the beacon, and find our way out." He frowned. "That's 10 clicks uphill with wounded, no air cover." "I know," she said, "but it's that or wait to die." He nodded once, "Then we move." As he walked off to brief the others, Eleanor looked back at the wreckage of her helicopter. For years it had been her home, her sanctuary in chaos. Now it was a grave marker for another near-death. She reached out, brushing her fingers across the metal skin one last time. Her reflection stared back in the faint firelight, tired, scarred but still standing. In the distance, thunder rolled, not weather, artillery. It was coming. And so was morning. She whispered under her breath, the words barely audible over the wind. "Not this time. I'm not leaving anyone behind this time." Then she turned toward the ridge, toward survival, redemption, and the storm waiting beyond dawn. Why did sunrise always feel like a lie? It looked peaceful from a distance, light spreading across the desert, painting gold over ruin, but Eleanor Hayes knew better. Sunrise didn't mean safety. It only meant the enemy could see you bleed. She woke the team before the first glow touched the horizon. The air was cold, the kind that cuts when you breathe. Their breath came out in short white bursts as they packed gear, checked weapons, and bandaged what they could. Ruiz approached, his face gray with fatigue. "Bird, done for. We stripped what we could, ammo, med kits, one working beacon battery." Eleanor nodded. "That's enough." He hesitated. "Branson can't walk." "I'll take him," she said without hesitation. Ruiz frowned. "Ma'am, that's not a discussion." She knelt by Branson. He was conscious now, barely. His eyes fluttered open when she spoke. "You're coming with us, Lieutenant." He tried to argue, but she cut him off. "You keep your head clear and your heart beating. I'll handle the rest." He gave a faint smile. "Yes, ma'am." She tightened his harness, adjusted his sling, and looked out toward the ridge. 10 kilometers, rough, uneven terrain, every rock a new kind of pain. But it was the only way to send that signal, the only way home. "Move out," she ordered. They started walking. The desert at dawn is cruel. Heat doesn't come gently, it hits like punishment. The sun climbed higher, and the sand began to shimmer, soft underfoot but sharp enough to blister through boots. Every few steps, Eleanor's shoulder screamed where shrapnel had cut deep. Every breath burned. She didn't stop, couldn't. Behind her, Ruiz led the rear, scanning the horizon. Collins and Vega moved on point, eyes darting between rock outcroppings. The recon men, Dyer's group, moved with quiet discipline, though exhaustion had carved itself into their faces. They carried silence between them, the kind that comes when men know words can't make things better. Hours passed like that. Step, breathe, watch, repeat. By midday, they reached the first ridge. "Hold," Eleanor said, signaling the team to rest. She eased Branson down beside a rock, checked his bandages. He was pale, sweating, but still trying to stay alert. "You ever think," he whispered, "that we don't get to pick where we make our stands?" She looked at him, the sunlight catching the scars along her cheek. "You think anyone does?" He smiled weakly. "Maybe you." She didn't answer. She looked out across the desert instead, scanning for movement, scanning for ghosts. And that's when she saw it. A glint on the far ridge, too still for rock, too sharp for chance. "Scope," she said quietly. Vega handed her the rifle with its optic. She peered through it and saw them. 2 figures, spotters, patient, waiting. Her pulse quickened. "They've been tracking us since the crash," she murmured. Ruiz crouched beside her. "How close?" "Close enough to follow without losing us. Smart, disciplined." He nodded grimly. "Then we're not alone out here." "No," she said, lowering the scope. "We never were." They kept moving. Faster now. The ridge grew steeper, rockier, forcing them into narrow passes where the sun turned everything into blinding glare. Eleanor's body ached. Her arms trembled from carrying Branson's weight, but she refused help. Pain kept her sharp. It reminded her she was still alive, still responsible. At one point, Ruiz caught up beside her, breathing hard. "You ever gonna let someone else carry the load?" She shot him a tired half-smile. "What load?" He laughed quietly. "You remind me of my co in Kandahar. Woman never stopped either. Said resting made her feel guilty." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "She make it out?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but she got the rest of us home." Eleanor nodded. "Then she did what she came to do." Ruiz studied her for a long moment. "And what about you? What you come here to do?" Her jaw tightened. "To make peace with a promise I broke." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't have to. The answer lived in her eyes. By late afternoon, they reached a canyon, shallow, winding, flanked by jagged rock. The heat shimmered like glass. "This way," Dyer said, pointing toward the shaded side. "We can make camp here for a few hours. No aerial line of sight." Eleanor agreed. They set down packs, drank what little water remained. Vega started a small signal dish assembly, their only hope of calling command once they reached higher ground. Eleanor sat apart, cleaning her sidearm with mechanical precision. Every movement was routine, learned long ago, something she could control when everything else fell apart. But her mind wasn't quiet. She kept seeing their faces, the 5 from Operation Halberd. Every time she blinked, they were there. Mason, the mechanic who always sang under his breath. Tors, who carried photos of his daughters. Nguyen, who joked about opening a diner when he got home. All gone. She had promised their families answers, but all she'd ever given them were folded flags and silence. Ruiz sat down across from her, breaking the quiet. "You're somewhere else again." She looked up. "You ever stop seeing them?" "Who?" "The ones who didn't make it." He thought for a moment. "No, you just learn to live with the noise they leave behind." She nodded slowly. "Noise, yeah, that's what it is." Then a faint sound. Metal against stone. Eleanor froze. Ruiz heard it too. She signaled silently, 3 fingers northwest flank. Vega and Collins moved instantly, rifles raised. A shadow flickered across the ridge, then another. The ambush came fast. Gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder through the canyon. "Down," she yelled, dragging Branson behind a boulder. Bullets tore through the sand around them. Vega returned fire. Ruiz moved up, taking a higher angle. The recon men split, flanking left. Eleanor grabbed her rifle, sighted the nearest muzzle flash and fired twice. 1 hit, 1 down. But there were more, too many. "Flares," she shouted. Vega popped 1. Red light bathed the canyon, painting chaos in color. "Contact right," Ruiz roared. "They're closing in." Eleanor's breath came fast, focused. She leaned from cover, fired again, 2 more bursts. The air stank of cordite and dust. She heard a scream. Collins hit. Ruiz dragged him back, blood soaking the dirt. "They're pushing us into the open," he shouted. "Not yet," Eleanor said. "Not if we turn their flank." She pointed toward a narrow ledge on the opposite ridge. "Ruiz, cover fire. Dyer with me." They sprinted through smoke and sand, bullets chasing their heels. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she reached the ledge, dropped to a knee, and fired down into the enemy's blind side. Precision, controlled fury. It worked. Within seconds, the return fire faltered. The remaining attackers scattered into the rocks. Silence again. Then the echo of retreat. Eleanor stayed still, rifle aimed, until the last sound faded. Only then did she lower it. Ruiz called out, "All clear." She exhaled, muscles trembling. "Status?" 2 wounded, Collins critical but stable, no losses. She nodded. "Then we keep moving before they regroup." Ruiz looked at her, incredulous. "You don't stop, do you?" She met his gaze. "Stopping's how you get remembered the wrong way." By the time they reached the upper ridge, the sun was sinking, a molten coin dropping behind the horizon. Every face was lined with exhaustion, every step slower. Eleanor planted the beacon base against a boulder, fingers steady despite the ache in her arm. Vega handed her the battery. "You really think command's still listening?" She slid the battery in, eyes fixed on the blinking light. "They better be." The device hummed weakly, signal light flickering once, twice, then steady. "Beacon live," she whispered. For a brief moment, hope felt real. Then over the horizon, they saw it, 3 columns of dust. Engines fast approaching. Ruiz swore under his breath. "They found us." Eleanor stood, eyes narrowing at the distant shapes. She felt the weight of every choice that had led here pressing on her chest. "Positions," she ordered quietly. "We hold this ridge." Vega frowned. "We're low on ammo, ma'am. We can't hold forever." "We don't need forever," she said. "Just long enough to be heard." As they prepared for what was coming, Ruiz stepped beside her. "You said you're here to make peace with a broken promise. That about now?" She glanced at him. a faint, tired smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah," she said softly, "now." The wind howled across the ridge, carrying the scent of dust and oil. The sound of engines grew louder. Eleanor adjusted her rifle, eyes on the horizon. And for a fleeting second, beneath all the fear and fatigue, she felt something strange, almost calm. Because maybe peace wasn't found in surviving. Maybe it was found in standing your ground, even when survival wasn't guaranteed. The first trucks appeared through the haze, headlights cutting through the twilight. Dozens of them, armed, organized. Eleanor breathed out slowly, steadying her aim. Beside her, Ruiz whispered, "Any last orders, Captain?" She looked at him, eyes steady, voice low. "Yeah, don't miss." The ridge lit up. Fire against sunset. The battle began. Why did the world always get quiet right before hell broke loose? The ridge was still. The air hung heavy, windless. Every man felt it, that tiny pause before chaos. Captain Eleanor Hayes crouched behind a rock ledge, rifle pressed to her shoulder, heartbeat in her ears. Below them, the 3 enemy trucks had stopped, engines idling. Men spilled out, a dozen, maybe more, moving with a precision that said they weren't just raiders. These were soldiers. Ruiz whispered, "They know exactly where we are." Eleanor's eyes tracked the first squad spreading left, the second climbing the slope. "Then they're about to find out who we are," she murmured. She switched her rifle to burst, adjusted her sights, and waited. 50 meters, 30. When the first silhouette broke into the open, she exhaled. Now. Gunfire cracked across the ridge. The team opened up in unison, short, disciplined bursts. 2 hostiles dropped instantly. The rest dove for cover, answering with volleys that ripped stone into dust. Vega shouted over the noise, "We're pinned." "Hold angles," Eleanor called back. "Don't waste shots." The air turned into thunder. Bullets ricocheted around them, dust burning their eyes, the acrid stench of gunpowder filling every breath. Ruiz leaned out, fired 3 times, ducked back with a grunt. 2 down, more coming. "Reload," she said, sliding a fresh mag. "We can't let them get around the flank." She crawled along the ridge toward Colin's position. He was bleeding through his bandage, face pale, still firing. "Ammo check?" she asked. "Last mag, ma'am." She handed him hers. "Make it count." He nodded, eyes steady. It wasn't courage anymore, just acceptance. The kind that comes when you realize bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's walking through it anyway. Another explosion rocked the slope. RPG. The blast threw sand and metal skyward, knocking Vega backward. Eleanor felt her ears ring, her vision blur, but she forced herself up again. "Everyone sound off," she shouted. Ruiz still breathing. "Vega, I'm good." "Dyer, left flank's folding. We need to fall back." Eleanor scanned their rear, nowhere to go but down. Retreat wasn't survival, it was a slow death. They needed cover, time, and a miracle. The radio crackled suddenly, faint, distorted. "Blackhawk 1, this is command, read. Signal weak." Her heart jolted. She pressed the transmitter. "Command, this is Hayes. We are under heavy fire, requesting immediate extraction at beacon coordinates." Static, then, "Negative on extraction, area compromised, hold position until." The signal died. She stared at the radio, disbelief cutting deeper than any wound. Ruiz saw her expression. "They're not coming, are they?" She didn't answer, because saying it out loud would make it real. She forced herself to breathe. "We're still alive, that's all that matters." But inside, something cracked, quiet, invisible, final. For years she'd believed the system would hold, that if you did your job, followed orders, someone always came. But now, hearing that silence where command should have been, she knew. They'd been written off. Ruiz crouched beside her, voice low. "Ma'am, what's the play?" She looked at the wounded, the smoke, the sun sliding lower in the sky. Her voice came out calm, colder than before. The play is we make our own extraction. The next wave came fast. Engines roared as another truck circled wide, mounting a machine gun on its bed. Eleanor ducked as tracer fire tore through their cover. "Suppress that gun," she ordered. Vega leaned out, launched a grenade. The explosion shattered the truck's turret, sending men scattering. Eleanor used the chaos, signaling Ruiz. "Move the wounded to the east ridge, dire cover." They began pulling back, step by step, laying fire as they moved. The ridge echoed with chaos, shouts, gunfire, the metallic scream of ricochets. Eleanor stayed last, covering them. Her rifle jammed. She cleared it without hesitation, fingers moving on instinct. Pain shot up her side again, but she ignored it. Pain was background noise now. When she finally ducked behind the next rock outcrop, Ruiz was waiting. "Everyone's up," he said, barely. She nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. No more trucks, no more engines, just distant movement like shadows melting back into the desert. "Why they stop?" Vega asked, panting. Eleanor watched the horizon. "They're waiting for nightfall. They think we'll run." Ruiz chuckled darkly. "They don't know you, ma'am." She looked at him. "They will." As the sun disappeared, the world turned to amber, then gray, then black. The desert wind picked up, carrying dust, the smell of blood, the metallic echo of spent rounds. They regrouped in a shallow depression near the ridge top, forming a tight circle. Branson stirred again, eyes half open. "Did we make it?" Eleanor knelt beside him. "For now." He winced. "They're coming back, aren't they?" "Yes," she said simply. He gave a weak laugh. "Then we'll just do it again." She almost smiled. "That's the plan." Vega was cleaning his weapon when he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Ma'am, why do you keep doing this? You've done your part. You could have stopped a long time ago." Eleanor stared out into the dark. "Because the people who stopped, they don't get remembered. The ones who keep going, even when it hurts, they're the reason anyone gets home." Ruiz added, "Even if home stops waiting." She looked at him. "Then you make a new one." Hours passed. They took turns resting in shifts. The beacon still blinked weakly against the night, its signal too faint to reach anyone who cared. Eleanor sat apart from the others, staring at it, that tiny light pulsing against the dark, refusing to die. She thought of her old Commander Lorna Pike, the woman who'd trained her. Pike used to say, "A pilot's job isn't to live forever. It's to keep someone else alive long enough to matter." Back then, Eleanor had believed it meant sacrifice. Now she understood it meant endurance. The kind of endurance that doesn't make headlines. The kind that leaves scars only you remember. Her radio crackled again, faint, garbled. "Hayes, if you can hear, command has rerouted evac. Can't confirm survivors." She felt her throat tighten. They weren't even sure she existed anymore. For a moment, she wanted to throw the radio into the sand. Then she didn't, because as long as it made noise, there was hope. And hope, however faint, was a weapon too. She pressed transmit. "Command, this is Captain Hayes. We are alive. Repeat, we are alive. You will not mark us KIA. Do you hear me? We are alive." Static answered. But somewhere in the background, a faint click acknowledgement. Maybe, maybe not. She lowered the radio, exhaled. "That's all I needed." Near midnight, Ruiz approached. "You should rest," he said. She shook her head. "If I rest, I dream." He studied her face, the exhaustion, the grit, the distant look that comes from seeing too much. "You ever think maybe you're not supposed to carry it all?" She smiled faintly. "Then who does?" He sat beside her, silent for a while. The stars above stretched endless, cold, and distant. "Command not coming," he said finally. "You know that, right?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah." Then what happens when the next wave hits? She looked at him. Then we fly without wings. He gave a dry laugh. That's supposed to mean something. It will, she said softly. The attack came an hour before dawn. The first sound was a thump, heavy and low like distant thunder. Then another. Mortars. Incoming, someone shouted. The ground erupted. Dust clouds bloomed across the ridge, shrapnel slicing through the night. Eleanor grabbed Branson, dragging him behind a rock wall as explosions lit the darkness. Status, she shouted over the roar. Vega's hit, Ruiz called. Leg wound bad. Dire. Still firing. She crawled toward the beacon, shielding it with her body as fragments rained down. The device sparked, blinking erratically. Not yet, she thought, not now. When the barrage stopped, everything fell silent again. The kind of silence that hums. Ruiz coughed, staggering toward her. They're coming up the slope fast. Eleanor checked her ammo, 3 mags left. Then this is it. He gave a tight grin. Could be worse. She glanced at the horizon, faint light rising. Yeah, she whispered, could be darker. They took positions. The first attackers crested the ridge, silhouettes against the pale dawn. Eleanor fired, precise and unflinching, each shot deliberate. Her world narrowed to sound, motion, breath. Behind her, Ruiz shouted orders, coordinating what was left of their defense. Branson, barely conscious, still tried to aim his pistol. Vega propped himself against a rock, bleeding but grinning through it. For a few minutes, it almost felt possible. Then a bullet tore across Eleanor's arm, spinning her sideways. She hit the ground hard, rifle clattering. Pain seared, but she forced herself back up. Ruiz reached for her. You're hit. Not enough, she growled, grabbing the rifle again. But even as she fired, she saw it, the third truck on the far slope, heavier, mounting a heavy cannon. Down, she yelled. The cannon roared, the ridge exploded, dust swallowed everything. She felt herself thrown backward, the world spinning. Then's nothing but ringing. When she came to, the light was blinding. She blinked, coughing dust, vision clearing slowly. The ridge was a ruin, smoke, silence. Bodies scattered, some moving, most not. She tried to stand, every muscle screamed. She managed to crawl toward the beacon. It was half buried, in rubble flickering weakly. She brushed dust off, hands trembling. The light pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Still alive. She pressed the transmitter again, voice raw. This is Captain Hayes, Ridge beacon active, we are still here. Static, then faint, almost unreal, a voice. Copy that, signal received, stand by. She froze, tears welled before she could stop them. Ruiz coughed behind her. Was that? She nodded, breath shaking. Yeah, someone heard us. He smiled through the blood on his lips. Told you you'd make M listen. She looked at him, exhaustion softening into something fragile. We're not done yet. In the distance, the faint rumble of approaching rotors, real, not imagined. Hope returning in the sound of engines. But the look in Eleanor's eyes wasn't victory. It was something else, something older. Because she knew what it cost to be heard. Sometimes command comes too late. Sometimes the only reason anyone's saved is because someone refused to stop speaking. As the sky brightened, she whispered to herself, quiet, steady. Sometimes courage isn't flying the mission, it's surviving the silence after it. And somewhere between the noise and the dawn, Captain Eleanor Hayes decided. If they lived through this, she'd never fly for orders again. Only for truth. Why did rescue always sound like guilt, wrapped in rotor blades? The thump of helicopters grew louder through the haze, slicing the dawn sky into pieces of hope and disbelief. For hours, Captain Eleanor Hayes had fought not to imagine that sound. Now that it was real, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the ghost of every mission that had come too late. She crouched near the beacon, one arm bandaged crudely. Dust streaked through her hair, eyes hollow from the night. The ridge around her was half gone, scarred rock, burned sand, silence where voices used to be. Ruiz sat nearby, back against a stone, blood dried along his neck, breathing shallow but steady. Branson lay beside the wreck of a crate, oxygen mask pressed to his face, whispering fragments of prayers between gasps. Vega and Dyer were still moving, helping whoever could still walk. Then the first shadow crossed over them, a massive gray helicopter hovering above the ridge like a steel angel trying to remember how to save. Eleanor lifted a flare, the last one. It hissed, burned red against the pale sky. "Over here," she yelled, though her voice was nearly gone. She didn't know if anyone heard, until the side door opened and ropes dropped through the dust. Figures descended, medics, security, the clean smell of order colliding with the stink of survival. Voices shouted commands, hands pulled bodies onto stretchers, words like stabilize, clear zone, evac priority 1. To them, it was just another extraction. To her, it was everything and nothing at once. A medic reached for her arm. "Ma'am, you're injured." She shook her head. "Later, get my people first." "Ma'am, you." "Now." Her tone left no room for rank debate. The medic moved on. Ruiz caught her eye as they lifted him onto a stretcher. "Guess we lived." She forced a thin smile. "We're working on it." His hand reached toward her, weak but deliberate. "Don't let them make this mean nothing, Captain." She gripped his fingers. "I won't." Then he was gone, carried toward the helicopter, his silhouette disappearing into the blur of motion and rotor wash. When they finally pulled her aboard, the world tilted, the ridge shrinking below, smoke curling upward like memory refusing to fade. For a long moment she couldn't look down, because all she saw was what she hadn't saved. The flight back to base was quiet. No chatter, just the rhythmic hum of engines and the soft metallic creak of survival. Eleanor sat strapped beside Branson's stretcher. His pulse was weak but steady. The medic glanced at her occasionally, uncertain whether to speak. He didn't. She was grateful. Through the window, dawn stretched wide, endless desert painted in light. From up here it almost looked peaceful, like none of it had happened. That was the cruel thing about altitude. It erased the details. Her mind wandered. Back to Halberd. Back to the night command never sent rescue. Back to the letters she wrote to families, words that still haunted her. She closed her eyes, head against the metal wall, and whispered to herself, "Not again." But she knew again had already happened. They landed at forward base, Raven, an hour later. The runway shimmered under the early sun, rows of med tents and armored trucks waiting like a new reality she wasn't sure she trusted. As soon as the rotors slowed, officers rushed in, clipboard faces, starched uniforms untouched by dust or fear. She hated that smell, the sterile scent of distance. A colonel she didn't recognize stepped forward. "Captain Hayes." "Yes, sir." He scanned her up and down, jaw tightening. "You were declared MIA 36 hours ago." "Not anymore," she said flatly. His tone sharpened. "You deviated from exfil protocol. You engaged hostile forces without authorization." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "We engaged because we were alive." He hesitated, glancing at the medics unloading the wounded. "Command appreciates your resilience, Captain, but there will be an investigation." She stared at him, disbelief first, then something colder. "Investigation." He cleared his throat. "Standard procedure following unauthorized engagement and loss of asset." She took a step closer, voice low but edged with steel. "Loss of asset. Those were people, Colonel, my crew, my team. You left us out there." His gaze faltered for a fraction. Communication was compromised. "Convenient," she said. He bristled. "Watch your tone, Captain." She smiled, tired, humorless. "You'll have to excuse me, sir. I just spent the night burying your communication errors." Before he could respond, a medic approached. "Sir, Captain Hayes needs medical clearance." The colonel exhaled sharply. "Fine, debrief at 1800. He walked away, already barking orders into his radio. Eleanor stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at her torn sleeves, the hum of base activity around her sounding distant. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger burned too fast. This was something deeper, disappointment that had nowhere left to go. Inside the med tent, they cleaned her wounds in silence. Saline sting, gauze, sutures. Pain was routine, the quiet was worse. The medic finally spoke. "They say you pulled 5 out alive." "7, she corrected softly. He paused. "I thought 2 didn't make it." "They did," she said, staring at the tent wall, "because I refused to count them out." He didn't reply. He just nodded, taped the bandage, and whispered, "Ma'am, you should rest." She didn't. Instead, she walked outside into the light. The base was buzzing, drones lifting, trucks moving, orders shouted. It looked like efficiency. It sounded like control. But beneath it all, she felt the same hum of detachment, the machine grinding forward, already forgetting what it cost to keep turning. She found Ruiz in recovery, IV in his arm, grin faint but stubborn. "You look like hell, Captain." She smirked. "Good, means I still match the job description." He laughed, then coughed. "They treating you like a hero yet?" She shook her head. "Not their kind of hero." He studied her face. "So what now?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the distant hangar where another helicopter sat gleaming, untouched, waiting for its next mission. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe stop letting other people define what saving lives looks like." Ruiz smiled softly. "You thinking of walking away?" She met his eyes. "Maybe just walking somewhere they can't rewrite what happened." He nodded. "If anyone could, it's you." They sat in silence for a while, 2 soldiers listening to the wind and pretending it didn't sound like memory. At 1800, she stood in the debrief room. White walls, cold lights. 3 officers behind a table, none of whom had dirt under their nails. The colonel spoke first. "Captain Hayes, we've reviewed your report. Command is considering commendation for valor under fire." She stayed silent. "However," he continued, "your deviation from extraction protocol resulted in loss of federal property and significant operational cost." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "We lost people, sir, not property." He cleared his throat. Nevertheless, the decision to engage was unauthorized. She leaned forward slightly. "Then put this in your report. Authorization was irrelevant. There was no command when we needed command. We acted because no one else would." A younger officer looked uneasy. "Captain, these procedures exist for safety," she cut in. "Tell that to the men who bled out while command waited for daylight." Silence. Even the colonel couldn't meet her eyes. Finally, he said, "Your record speaks for itself. We'll make our recommendation to higher command." She nodded once, turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Sir," she said quietly, "for what it's worth, you can investigate me all you want. But understand this, if it happens again, I'll do it again. Because duty isn't paperwork, it's people." Then she walked out. No salute, no permission. Just a woman leaving the noise behind. Outside, the sun was setting again, the same golden light, but softer now, almost kind. The air smelled of fuel and dust, and something that felt like freedom. Branson was awake, sitting in a wheelchair near the runway, arm in a sling. He looked up as she approached. "They said we're heading stateside soon." She nodded. "You did good, Lieutenant." He smiled faintly. "We all did, you just made us believe we could." She crouched beside him. "You'll fly again." He chuckled. "After this, Maybe I'll just fix them instead." She smiled. "That's flying too, just lower altitude." He laughed, and for a moment it felt almost normal. Night settled over the base. Lights flickered across the tarmac. Engines idled somewhere far off. Eleanor walked alone toward the far end of the runway, the one place still untouched by routine. She looked up. Stars. The same ones that had watched her over every battlefield, every loss, every moment she wondered if courage meant anything at all. In the distance, she could hear new crews prepping for tomorrow's missions. New names, new orders, same machine. And she realized something simple, something she'd known but never said. You can't save everyone, but you can refuse to forget them. She whispered to the night, voice soft but sure. For every mission that ends too soon, someone has to keep telling the story. Then she turned back toward the hangars, toward the quiet hum of life continuing. Not because she wanted to keep flying for them, but because she still believed in the ones who would need someone like her up there. And somewhere deep in the noise of engines and wind, the moral settled, quiet, honest, unpolished. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why did quiet feel so loud? Eleanor Hayes hadn't heard rotor blades in 6 months, yet the sound still lived somewhere behind her heartbeat. Every morning when she woke, she expected vibration under her feet, the metallic hum of readiness. But all she found was silence, sunlight through blinds, and the faint creak of a floor that didn't move. She lived near the coast now, in a town small enough that people still waved at strangers. Her house sat on the edge of a field where wind came off the ocean and carried the smell of salt instead of jet fuel. On paper it was peace. In practice it was purgatory. The Navy called it an honorable discharge. Her therapist called it reintegration. She called it waiting. She spent the first weeks doing what soldiers do when there's no mission, maintenance. She cleaned the garage until tools lined up with parade precision. Rebuilt the lawnmower engine twice. Filed every paper she could find into labeled boxes. But the mind isn't a machine you can idle. And sometimes, at 3 a.m., she'd wake to the phantom roar of engines and reach for a flight helmet that wasn't there. One morning the knock came. She opened the door to find an unfamiliar young woman standing in civilian fatigues. "Captain Hayes." "Not a captain anymore," Eleanor said. The woman smiled awkwardly. "Still ma'am where I come from. I'm Tessa Reed, Flight School, North Bend. Commander Pike said I should find you." That name cut through her like wind through broken glass. Lorna Pike, her old gone 2 years now, cancer, but still mentoring even after death apparently. Eleanor stepped aside. "Come in." Tessa crossed the threshold like someone entering a legend. "I'm supposed to start advanced rotor training next month. They say you were the best. I just wanted to ask how you knew when you were ready." Eleanor studied her. Barely 23, bright eyes, hands that hadn't yet learned the weight of loss. Ready for what? For combat, for not freezing when it counts. Eleanor turned toward the window, watching gulls ride the wind. "You don't get ready, you get honest." Tessa frowned. "Honest?" "About fear, about who you'll be when it starts to hurt." She looked back. "Sit, I'll make coffee." By the second cup, the girl was talking fast. Numbers, tests, simulator hours, all the ways she was proving herself. Eleanor listened quietly, remembering herself at that age, driven, certain that skill could outfly vulnerability. When Tessa finished, Eleanor said, "Let me guess, you think courage is the part where you don't shake." Tessa hesitated. "Isn't it?" "No." Eleanor leaned forward. "Courage is when you shake and still hold the stick steady." The girl smiled, half embarrassed. "They never teach that in manuals." "They can't," Eleanor said. "Manuals are written for machines." Something softened in the room. It was the first time in months Eleanor felt her voice do more than echo. Word spread faster than she expected. By spring, more young pilots started showing up, 2 at first, then 5, then 10 each, bringing notebooks, flight logs, and the same unspoken hunger: how to be brave without losing yourself. They met in the hangar at the local airstrip, a rust-stained building that smelled of oil and sea fog. Eleanor rewired the old simulator herself, scrounged parts from salvage yards, and turned the space into a kind of sanctuary, half classroom, half confessional. She called it Echo Flight. The name came to her one night, while watching the tide pull light across the water. "Because echoes mean someone once called out," she told Tessa, and the world answered. Their first session was chaos. Young flyers too loud, too proud, laughing to hide nerves. Eleanor let them. She remembered needing noise to drown uncertainty. Then she dimmed the lights, played cockpit audio from real missions, hers, stripped of names and dates. Gunfire, static, the calm voice of a pilot saying, "I'm still up, holding altitude, still up," until silence. When the recording ended, no one spoke. "That," Eleanor said, "is why we train, not for medals, for minutes. Every minute you stay composed is a life you keep in the sky." She saw something shift in their faces, respect that wasn't born from rank, but from recognition. They'd finally heard what courage sounds like when it's terrified. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor began to live again, though she'd never call it that. She woke early, brewed black coffee, drove to the hangar before sunrise. Tessa was always there first, eager, scribbling notes. Ruiz called sometimes from rehab, his voice steady, humor intact. "Teaching now, huh?" he'd say. "Didn't peg you for a professor." "I'm not," she'd reply. "I'm just trying to make fewer funerals." The laughter helped. It reminded her that healing isn't an absence of pain, it's the decision to build something despite it. One evening, after drills, she caught Tessa staring at an old framed photo on the hangar wall. It showed Eleanor with her last crew, smiling, arms slung around each other, sand still on their uniforms. "You miss them," Tessa said softly. "Every day. Does it ever get easier?" Eleanor considered. "No, but it gets quieter. You learn to live in the spaces they left behind." Tessa nodded, eyes wet. "You ever go back up?" Eleanor looked toward the simulator, lights blinking in standby. "Every time I close my eyes." Summer arrived. Echo Flight had become more than a project, it was a refuge. They ran night simulations, survival scenarios, even rescue protocols based on Eleanor's own missions. She taught them how to fly low without panic, how to read wind the way others read emotion. But more than anything, she taught them how to come down. After every session, they circled up in folding chairs, helmets on the floor, and talked, not about victories, but about fear, guilt, doubt. She called it debriefing the soul. And somehow that phrase stayed. One night after everyone left, Tessa lingered. "You know," she said, "half the academy talks about you now. The woman who flew through hell and built a school out of it." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That's not what I built." "What then?" She looked around the hangar, the flicker of tool lights, the quiet hum of resting machines. "A place where no one has to be the hero alone. But even peace needs testing." It came one morning in late August, when a recruiter from Naval Command visited. He wore the same crisp uniform, the same detached politeness Eleanor remembered too well. "Captain Hayes," he began, "your leadership program has drawn considerable attention. Command would like to formalize it, funding, facilities, curriculum, under Navy oversight, of course." Eleanor studied him. "Oversight?" "Yes, ma'am, we provide structure." She let the word hang in the air like smoke. "Structure, what left my team to die." The recruiter blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me." Her voice was calm, steady. "You want to sponsor courage, not understand it." He shifted uncomfortably. The offer stands, think about it. I already have, she said. Echo Flight stays independent. We answer to the people we teach, not the ones who forgot them. The man nodded stiffly, left his card on the table and walked out. Tessa approached once he was gone. You just turned down government funding. Eleanor smiled. Freedom's cheaper than paperwork. That night, storm clouds rolled in over the ocean. She stood outside the hangar, rain soaking her hair, watching lightning fork across the horizon. Each flash illuminated the world for a fraction of a second, bright, raw, honest. She thought about how that's what her life had become, flashes of clarity between storms. Inside, Tessa switched on the simulator. Come on, Captain, she called. Let's fly one more. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped inside. The seat fit like memory. As the simulated rotors spun up, the screens filled with desert light. For a moment she was back there, dust, heat, chaos, but this time no one screamed. Only her own breathing, calm, steady. Tessa's voice crackled through the headset. Permission to take off. Eleanor smiled. Permission granted. And as the virtual horizon rose, she realized something she hadn't dared admit. She didn't miss the battlefield. She missed the purpose. And now maybe she'd rebuilt it. Months later, Echo Flight was invited to give a demonstration at a veterans symposium. Eleanor almost declined. Public stages weren't her terrain, but Ruiz convinced her over the phone. Let them see what survival looks like when it teaches. She agreed. On the day of the presentation, she stood before a hangar full of officers, recruits, and old warriors with haunted eyes. Tessa introduced her, Captain Eleanor Hayes, founder of Echo Flight. Eleanor stepped up to the mic. For a moment she just looked at them, the skeptics, the believers, the broken. Then she spoke. I was a combat pilot for 16 years. I've flown through storms that tore metal like paper. But the hardest storm was silence. The silence after you land, after you realize the world moves on and you're still up there, alone. I built Echo Flight because silence kills more soldiers than bullets. It convinces us we don't matter anymore. So we talk, we train, we remember. We fly again even if it's just in our minds. And maybe that's enough to keep the sky from forgetting us. No applause at first, just quiet, heavy, real. Then one by one, hands came together. Not celebration, acknowledgement. The sound of a community, remembering how to breathe. Afterward, as the hangar emptied, Tessa found her watching the horizon again. You did it, the young pilot said. Eleanor shook her head gently. No, we did. I just refused to stay silent. Tessa smiled. What now? Eleanor looked toward the sea. The sun was setting, orange bleeding into blue, the same colors that had framed every dawn she'd ever flown through. Now, she said softly, we keep flying, just lower where others can follow. And as the night settled, she whispered the lesson she wished someone had told her years ago. Courage isn't returning to the sky, it's teaching others not to fall from it. The wind outside the hangar moved softly that morning, gentle, almost hesitant, like it knew the weight of goodbye. Eleanor Hayes stood beside the open doors of Echo Flight, coffee cooling in her hand, watching sunlight crawl across the floor until it reached the silver line of the simulator. The world was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't ache. It simply existed, like breath after a long-held note. Behind her, the hangar was alive with faint motion. Students running checks, laughter echoing off metal walls, the hum of a place that no longer depended on her voice to keep its rhythm. That was how she knew it was time. Tessa Reed was already leading the morning briefing. Her voice, steady, clear, commanding, rolled across the space the way Eleanor's once had. Fuel ratios stay conservative on all low-altitude passes, Tessa said, tapping the screen. Remember, the goal isn't to impress, It's to endure. Eleanor smiled. That line was hers. She said it once in a storm years ago, when a frightened lieutenant had asked how to look brave. Now it lived in someone else's mouth. That was legacy, not statues, not medals. Echoes. She took a slow sip, the coffee bitter and grounding, and let the voices blur into a gentle hum. It was the sound of continuity, the rarest music in a soldier's life. Later that day, she walked the perimeter path that circled the field. The ocean was close enough that you could taste salt on the wind, hear gulls over the low drone of practice engines. She paused near the chain-link fence, eyes following a training helicopter as it lifted gracefully into the blue. Tessa was at the controls. Eleanor could tell by the steadiness of the ascent. No flair, no show, just quiet competence. A line surfaced in her mind, uninvited. You're still up, holding altitude, still up. The last words she'd heard before Halberd went dark. But instead of pain, the memory brought a strange warmth. She whispered under her breath, still up. And for the first time, it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like pride. A small voice startled her from behind. Captain Hayes. She turned. It was a boy, 16 maybe, awkward in a borrowed jumpsuit. He held a logbook against his chest like a shield. Just Eleanor, she said gently. What's your name? Ben, my dad flew medevac in Kandahar. He didn't come back. He hesitated, eyes down. I'm starting training next week. I wanted to say thanks. Mom said your program, why they opened scholarships for kids like me. Eleanor's throat tightened. She crouched to meet his eyes. Then you tell your mom this place belongs to both of you, all right? He nodded quickly, relief flooding his face. Yes, ma'am. When he left, she stayed kneeling for a long moment, watching the dust swirl in sunlight. There it was, the reason she'd stayed after all. Not to rewrite the past, but to make sure its lessons had a home. That evening she sat alone in the office, writing. Not a report, not orders. Just words, slow, deliberate, written in a notebook she'd carried since her first deployment. To whoever finds this after I'm gone. Her handwriting was neat, restrained. She wrote the way she flew, precise, controlled, aware that every line had weight. There's something they never tell you about war. They train you to fight, to fly, to survive, but not to return. They never teach you how to land when there's no runway left. She paused, letting the pen rest. I used to think courage was the noise we make under fire. Now I know it's the silence we choose afterward, the moment we decide to keep building instead of breaking. She smiled faintly at the page. If you're reading this, maybe you're one of mine. Maybe you've stood in this hangar and heard your heart echo off these walls. If you have, remember, fear isn't your enemy. Forgetting is. Outside, laughter carried through the open doors, students finishing drills, teasing alive. Eleanor set the pen down, folded the page carefully, and placed it in the old mission folder labeled Echo Flight, Founding Charter. A small secret for whoever took her place next. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted. Leaves turned brittle gold around the base perimeter. Eleanor spent less time in the hangar now, more in the small workshop behind it, repairing instruments, repainting tail numbers on training craft. Work that didn't need medals, just patience. Tessa noticed, of course. One afternoon she found Eleanor sanding a rotor blade, sleeves rolled up, humming an old tune. Trying to retire quietly? Tessa asked. Eleanor smirked, trying to see if you notice. I noticed, Tessa said. We can handle things. You've built something that runs on its own. That's the point. Tessa hesitated. I'm not ready to do this without you. Eleanor set the sandpaper down. You already are, you just haven't believed it yet. Silence lingered. Then Tessa said softly, when you flew us through those early simulations, you always kept one hand on the controls, even when we thought we were flying alone. I think about that a lot. Eleanor nodded. That's leadership, knowing when to let go while they still think you're there. They laughed quietly together, the kind of laugh that carries gratitude disguised as humor. Then Tessa reached out her hand. Come back tomorrow. We're dedicating the new wing. The trainees voted to name it after you. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You can't name a building after someone who's still fixing it. Watch us, Tessa said, smiling. The dedication was simple. No flags, no speeches carved in marble. Just a wooden plaque on the hangar door that read, HAYES Wing, for the ones who keep flying. When they unveiled it, the crowd clapped softly, almost reverently. Eleanor stood at the edge, hands in her pockets, heart full but quiet. Tessa handed her a microphone. Say something, she whispered. Eleanor hesitated, then stepped forward. Her voice carried through the hangar, low and calm. I spent most of my life chasing the sky. Somewhere along the way, I realized the point wasn't to escape the ground. It was to bring others safely back to it. If this place means anything, let it mean that. Fly high, yes, but never forget how to land. Applause followed, gentle but steady. And beneath the sound, Eleanor heard something else, relief. A collective exhale from people who finally believed survival could be sacred too. That night she sat on the hangar roof, wrapped in a blanket, stars spilling across the sky. The air was cool, carrying the hum of distant waves. Tessa joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. You ever miss it? Tessa asked. Eleanor thought for a long time. Every day, but not the way I used to. I don't miss the noise. I miss what it meant to be needed. You still are. Eleanor smiled. Then maybe I did something right. They sat in silence a while. Then Tessa asked, when you were in the war, did you ever think you'd find peace? Eleanor looked up at the stars, so many of them, indifferent yet familiar. I didn't think peace was something you found. I thought it was something you built, piece by piece, and I guess this is mine.